All right, welcome back to another episode of Elevate Your Grind, brought to the Cannabis Lab. I am your host, Todd Rosales, and thank you for joining us today. If you guys will notice, things are going to be a little bit different this time around. We've gotten to the point where my schedule is so crazy that we're going to record these episodes. So I'm going to do a little introduction for you. This week's episode is the great Graham Farrar from Glasshouse Group. I've known Graham for a little bit now. He has been extremely kind to me in my career. We have a partnership with them through Heisman, carried at all the Glasshouse retailers across California. Graham was kind enough to sit down with me. I was trying to save it for a time where Graham and I can be in person together. Unfortunately, I just didn't want to keep pushing him off until that happened with our crazy travel schedule. So at some point, Graham and I will sit down in person, but we decided to jump on this Zoom and talk to each other. We've talked everything from Glasshouse Group, its humble beginnings, raising kids as a member of the cannabis industry, being a proud cannabis advocate, and how you deal with that with other kids and other parents. And even I would say some of the unjust hate he gets on the internet and why maybe that is not applicable to him. Graham is always a good conversation. The man always has something to say. And I think if you sit down with him, you'll definitely learn something. So enjoy this conversation with Graham. But before we get into it, this episode is brought to you by DeRay & Company. There are so many of you cannabis companies out there. You grow amazing product. You put the time and care into your cannabis. And unfortunately, you just don't know how to tell your story. You don't know how to tell it the right way, or you don't know who to tell it to. You're gonna need some help. Are you ready to make an indelible impression? With offices in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and Aspen, Colorado, DeRay & Company is equipped to guide your cannabis brand with strategic public relations and marketing. Working with clients in the cannabis industry, this agency keeps a watchful eye on local and federal legislation, key expos and leadership conferences, and has proven relationships with media, influencers, and thought leaders, such as myself. I feel like I'm all of those things. I'm media, I'm an influencer, and I'm definitely a thought leader. At least so I'm told. You know, I'm self-deprecating. I don't believe a thing of that. But whether it's public relations, marketing, influencer relations, content development, or other strategic communication services, DeRay & Company delivers results for clients up and down the supply chain that are growing, manufacturing, producing, testing, innovating, and providing ancillary professional services for the cannabis industry. DeRay & Company, you've got to go see the dynamos at DeRay & Company. DeRay herself has been incredibly helpful to me in my career. I've known some of her teammates since high school, and they are an incredible group of people. Definitely go see them. And you can find them at DeRayandCompany.com or CannabisMarketingPR.com. That is DeRay, DUREE, and Company.com or CannabisMarketingPR.com. Tell them Todd sent you. All right, folks, let's get into the conversation with Graham. Graham, thank you so much for joining me today. We now have our podcast reads our intros, so I don't have to welcome you in and do the introduction. I'll do that after this show, actually. But Graham, thank you for sitting down. How is everything going on the West Coast right now?
No, thanks a lot for having me, and I'm glad I get to be the first one to get off the hook of doing the intro. So, how are things going in the West Coast? Well, I love cannabis, and there's more cannabis than there's ever been. And I think more people enjoying cannabis than there's ever been. So from that point of view, things are great. California is a challenging market. We're living through challenging times, but I think making some progress. And overall, I think it's hard work, but we're lucky to have the opportunity to work on the problems we're working on.
No, and I couldn't agree with you more. We definitely have one of the best jobs in the world. So you had just recently done a Cannabis Lab panel. Thank you so much for doing that. And right before we started recording, I love what you had said about how we all need to come together and talk to each other and do this together. And I think that is the quintessential thing in the industry. The one thing that I took away from, we called it legacy versus corporate. I hated that name because I know you need both sides of the coin to succeed, especially in today's cannabis world. Like, definitely do not discount the world that came before me, but also I know the values that some other people bring to the industry as well too. And I think it's just value add all around. If you don't mind, like, can you just expand on that a little bit more? You said you got to meet Chris Ball, you guys got to interact and became friendly. I feel like that is a huge connection there because I see the two of you guys doing great things together in the future, even whether it's a retail standpoint or a collaboration standpoint or anything.
Yeah, no, I think it was a great panel. And the only thing that I didn't like about it was that it was versus, right? That was the word. It should not have been versus. It should be legacy and corporate, right? Like, and I mean, it's, let's go back all the way.
We need the clickbait, people got to click on
it. you need to see the rumble tumble, the luchadors out there.
Exactly.
Yeah. But it's true. Like, I mean, I'll start with how do you even define what's the definition of legacy? What's the definition of corporate, right? Like, what is anybody out there selling cannabis with a license that's not a LLC, which stands for limited liability corporation? I don't think so. You can't even get a license as an individual. So everyone is a corporation if you're technical about it, right? And I thought that conversation was great because you had people coming into the same place from different origin points, right? And nobody there didn't think cannabis made the world a better place. Nobody there was looking and trying to say, hey, I'm trying to get rid of this other person, right? And I think, Chris, you mentioned Chris Ball with Ball Family Farms, great guy, awesome energy. He said something there that's really stuck with me, right? Which is he's a legacy guy and his goal is to become a national brand. There is no national brand that is not a corporation, right? So this is a legacy guy who's actually wanting to head over and figure out how to become, in some ways, corporate, right? No one's going to look at him though and go, hey, you're the corporate guy, you're the attorney who's never been in weed, and someone gave you hundreds of millions of dollars and you get focus groups and brand managers and to build your thing. It's him, right? It's authentic. Ball Family Farms is amazing. And to your point, awesome ways that we can work together. He's on the shelves of our stores, right? So here's Glass House, cannabis, large, Ball Family Farms, legacy, smaller, working together and making sure that great products get to consumers the way that they're supposed to. And I think that's the point, right? Which is we're trying to make the world a better place with cannabis, and it takes all the pieces. You need all the ingredients to bake a good cake, and that means companies that are bigger and companies that are smaller, and farmer market growers and large growers, and that's what we got to put together.
100%, man. It's funny to me because all of a sudden we get to this cannabis industry and people think things are different, and they're not. Yeah. Like, at the end of the day, you have a Jobs and you have a Wozniak, you have a Gates and you have an Allen, right? Woz had no interest in being the business guy. He didn't care about selling the computers. Shit, the dude wanted to give them away for free, right? Yeah. If it wasn't for Steve Jobs, like, Apple would have been completely open source. It would have been like Wikipedia. So, we look at all these other industries, and absolutely, if you look at that model, the legacy guys, the people who have been doing it forever that bleed this thing, they're 100% needed. But you also need someone to do your taxes. You need someone to do your accounting. You need someone to do your legal work. You need people to sell. And like you said, you had mentioned this before. I'd said, being an entrepreneur, you almost need to be an influencer as well, too. Like, you like weed. I like weed. We're professionals. We have kids. I wasn't legacy because I didn't have the balls to sell it illegally. I was scared. It wasn't something I wanted to get into. I was always interested in weed. I always thought about doing it, and I always purchased it. And don't get me wrong, I've gotten into some sketchy fucking situations purchasing it. So I feel like I've sniffed the legacy market. But at the end of the day, there are a lot of us that have a professional background that also come to the table and have a passion for weed. We just weren't brave enough as the people who came before us to do it when it wasn't allowed by law, if you will. So it's always interesting to me when there's this verse, like you said, and we unfortunately named it that way, when I truly, like, the people I enjoy talking to the most are the legacy folks, because it's like, who am I going to learn more about that side of the industry where I don't have access to, where that history has not been documented that well, at least not in mainstream media, to learn.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the legacy folks, they got us where we are today, right? I mean, you go back and why is cannabis legal? Well, it started first, they got it medically legal. And why did they get it medically legal? Because there was people who had a passion for the plant and how it could help people, right? I mean, that's why we had 26 years of medical cannabis in California, was not because people said, hey, anybody who wants to on a Friday night should get stoned. What actually pushed it over the wall was legacy folks with compassion, helping patients, Don Perone, all the stuff that happened in San Francisco, AIDS, cancer, the people who saw firsthand that the plant could help. That's what got this thing started, right? And paved the way and made what we're sitting here in now possible. So it's not, you absolutely can't ignore that. You also shouldn't ignore the fact of where we're going, which is that cannabis is getting more normalized. And that means it becomes more like regular businesses, and regular businesses do things that regular businesses do, which, like you said, filling out your taxes, figuring out how do you do distribution in a state the size of California with, the 5th largest economy in the world. Like, that's normal stuff, right? And as much as I think we are overregulated and overtaxed in cannabis, normal businesses also, like, you don't have bars without liquor licenses, right? You don't have restaurants without health certificates and inspections. And I don't think most people want that to go away. So that also applies, which is there are some rules, that you got to follow to be normal as well. So, I think that in my opinion, the right answer is there should be a place for everybody. There's just like, Pliny the Elder from Russian River Brewing, one of my favorite beers. Basically, the only place you can get it is by going to Santa Rosa and picking it up, right? I love it, but I got a couple in my fridge. That's special occasion stuff. If I'm at the beach, I don't actually want a 6-pack of Pliny the Elders. I want a Pacifico, right? Like, they're two different things. Neither one of them is wrong. And for the consumer, who I think we should, mostly be thinking about when we talk about this stuff, the right answer is there's Russian River Brewing, there's Pliny the Elder, there's also Pacifico, there's also Budweiser, there's also Sam Adams, and it should all be available. And that's why, some of the farmers, like the guys up at Huckleberry Hill Farm, have this whitethorn rose weed. Thankfully, this guy Greg turned me on to, and I got a sample. We actually, put the pieces together to get it in our stores. Fucking amazing weed. I love it. He is unlikely to have that product because he's of the size of his farm in every store, right? And he's Russian River. He's Pliny the Elder. That's awesome. I want to be Pacifico, Sam Adams, and Lagunitas, right? Like, that's okay. We're both right? Because there's consumers who want it, and even the same consumer who wants it for different times.
Agreed, man. I couldn't agree with you more. It's funny because Ricky, obviously with the Heisman show and everything, and we do business together, so what I do. Like, I have this conversation with Ricky all the time when we try to figure out, like, when we're picking new strains and evaluating and doing the pheno hunts and stuff. It's like, what do we like? What do we like? Well, the short answer is we like weed. Like, there are the ones that I prefer more than others, or the ones that, like, I'll gravitate to. And I'm a big fan of the citrusy strains and things like that. But at the end of the day, like, if it's a good strain, if it's grown well, if it's produced well, like, I'm going to enjoy it. And honestly, until the legal cannabis market really came around, I never truly understood, like, the wine snobs of the world or the craft beer snobs. I thought they were just these guys who wore tight pants and had pointy mustaches and talked all hoity toity. But then, I hear myself in conversation with some of my friends about cannabis, and it's the same way. When I just, to be honest, like, I live in Florida. I had to get my med card reinstated today. And then the doctor's talking to me about, he's like, my issues. And again, it's a medical state. And he's like, what type of cannabis do you use? Like, do you use the sativas and the indicas? I'm like, and I started getting into, like, well, if I have to work today, I like something limonene focused because it actually helps me block things out. I don't like that for the weekend when I'm with my kids, because I want to be present with them and I don't want to be in my head talking about, thinking about work and stuff like that. And the doctor's just looking at me and I'm just like, yeah, dude, I understand this stuff. So it's funny when you say that. That's what excites me the most. And that's why I love going out to Florida. I mean, sorry, not Florida. Florida weed is okay. But in California, to me, that is like where I think the entire market needs to go. Even if you go into your stores and there's so many brands and so many different things, like, I go in there and obviously, as the VP of business development for Heisman, I'm always going to support my own brand, but I am a big fan of other brands as well, too. And that's what I think is one of the coolest things about our industry as well, too, is there is a place for everybody. There's a product for everybody, but we all love to share what we have. And you've been to Hall of Flowers as well as me. I think that's one of the coolest events because it's the coming together of the industry. And so many people are just so excited to share what they've made and what they have. And it's just a huge exchange of products and ideas. And nobody's really like, I mean, don't get me wrong, we're humans. Everybody shits on somebody at some point, but, like, everyone's really excited to try everything there. Like, everybody I know is pumped for Hall of Flowers. I'm sure you feel the same way.
Yeah, no, I think it's really cool. I think, to your point, California lives in the future of cannabis, right? Like, we are, the state and the industry is typically, in my opinion, years ahead of where everybody else is, right? I mean, you live in Florida, so Florida example, right? What was it, 6 weeks ago that BHO was legalized in Florida? You could actually start getting shatter and stuff like that, right? Like, you couldn't even, I don't even know if you could get shatter on the shelves of the California dispensary, right? Like, that was 5 years ago. Now it's live resin and live rosin and diamonds and all this new stuff. It just kind of lived the culturally and experience and time and size of market. It lives in the future. And yeah.
I think there's only one company right now that even does live resin pods. I don't even think that, I
Yeah,
think there's
I mean, it's
one
like
out of all the 23. Everything is
distillate
distillate
and
still.
shatter and all that kind of stuff, right? So I think Hall of Flowers is an example of that, right? Where there's actually enough of an industry here that you can get a trade show where you've got buyers and products and everything is put together, and there's an amazing amount of variety there, right? Cannabis, it is interesting. Cannabis is still so nascent that each Hall of Flowers, it's like 80% of the companies are new because people are trying ideas and experimenting. That's one of the things I love about California. It is where natural selection for cannabis happens. This is the petri dish. This is where all the the ideas are coming, and this is where we have. It's the closest thing to a free market out there, right? It's still overtaxed and overregulated, but you got 1,900 brands happening here, right? It's like, if you're a top 5 brand in California, you're doing pretty good. If you're a top 5 brand in Florida, you could be basically last, right? And that's a very different environment to be in.
So no, it's interesting. Like the Florida, to me, it seems, and again, it's hard for me to say because I'm friends with everybody in the industry, and there's some good product there. But I equate it, and I've had this conversation. I don't think I've used this analogy in a while, but it's New York pizza, right? Like there's a couple good slices down here in Florida, and I can send you to the specific store to go get it. But when you're walking the streets of Manhattan, 80% of those places are going to be one of the best slices of pizza you ever had. It just hits different, right? And when you're in California, like your mid-grade stuff is what we have top shelf here in Florida. So it's just completely different. And you can go into any dispensary and anywhere in California, and you can find good to great weed. And that's just the major difference there. And that's why I see the major difference in a lot of markets. And I think it's just because I don't think it's because I know it's because, and I'm not a fucking soothsayer for seeing this, but cannabis has been so ingrained into the heritage in California that you guys have always been more educated on us even before the legal market, right? Where, if you guys remember Grandma's Boy, that movie where he's like, listen, I got the Frankenstein stuff. I got the bling. I got the bling bling. I got the deer shit. And he's like, yo, just give me a bag of weed. I feel like 60% of the country is still give me a bag of weed because they don't know. They like weed. They like good weed. They'll hear some strains here and there, but they're not looking into terpene profiles. They're not looking into effects. They're not looking into THC percentages. Just give me a bag of weed. So now when you have all these brands and you have all these different strains and everything else, like I feel like they're almost overwhelmed, right? Where California,
it's like they need to be educated. They're starting at square one. So needs to walk them through it. It's really interesting because we get these little glimpses of what the future looks like. Like I think California is a glimpse in the future. Another glimpse in the future right now, though, you mentioned New York and pizza, right? Is the chains are basically off on the dispensaries in New York right now, right? There's the delis are selling weed right now. There's blocks where there's 7 dispensaries in the Lower East Side on one block, right? And it's a really interesting thing is I did the tour myself, which is I walked around those dispensaries and Empire and a handful of other ones. And I went in there and said, hey, what are you guys selling? What do you guys think of California weed? Answer from everyone: California weed is the best. It's all we sell, right? Like that's a glimpse in the future. Like Florida's closer, New Jersey, Michigan, like there's a ton of places that you could get weed. You're not, this is not a within the rule books, here's the regulations. This is what's the best weed for the best value. California weed, it's all we sell, right? So it shows you what people want when they can have it. And it is that what you're talking about. It's that culture and it's that new discerning, and it's that evolved taste. Of course, it won't be 100%. My prediction is 8 out of the 10 brands in cannabis will be coming from California, but the reality is it's a different market, and that's we just touched on a bunch of great things about it. Challenges to it: it's a competitive market, it's tough, the structures are hard, the imbalances between supply and demand are hard, right? So there's all these things that are kind of other sides of the same coin, which is what makes it also what breeds excellence and quality and innovation and all those other things that in some ways push things forward.
It's funny, I couldn't agree with you more. I've had, again, these are conversations I'd love to have. I think from a consumption standpoint, I truly believe that New York will be one of the highest revenue buying states
up there for sure
in the country. I think it's going to crush. I think the sales will be higher than California. I think when it becomes federally legal and you have interstate commerce, the majority of that weed sold in New York will be coming from California, and that's across the country. It's just how it's going to go. I agree with you that 8 out of the 10 brands will definitely be coming from California. Even as I look at our own brand, right? Like in the future, if there's interstate commerce, I imagine the majority of our supply will be coming from California because that's just where the best is. And I feel like a lot of states right now, like you're just pining for it, and you're always going to be comparing it to California weed. It goes back to that pizza analogy. Like I'll eat enough crappy pizza, or I'm like, no, this is good. And then I have the good pizza. I'm like, oh, I'm eating trash back home.
I mean,
right?
And you're not far afield, right? Like if you look at agriculture, you could say the same thing, right? California produces more agriculture than any other state in the country. Produces 95% of the wine. So like it's a good place to grow things. And cannabis in particular is suited for it, right? So like when I say Iowa and you say corn, or Florida, you say oranges or whatever, you say cannabis, and it's California. So it doesn't mean it all has to be a California brand, but I think the overwhelming majority will be grown in California. It's where the culture of the genetics comes from. It's where the culture of innovation and new products comes from. And then it'll, in an interstate commerce world, it'll go everywhere. Just like, I'm eating Florida oranges in California and eating and they're drinking Napa wine in New York, right? Like that's just the way it should be.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, that's how industry works in general. Just they pop up in different pockets. And let's be honest, I would say probably the people with the most intimate cannabis cultivation knowledge, at least the largest concentration of them, probably are in California, because that's just historically where it's been. So it's just even the people that you're hiring, right? I can talk about this stuff
for it too. I'm a big fan of sun-grown cannabis, and it's hard to find places that have a better climate for growing either outdoors or in a greenhouse cannabis than California. And Southern California is, as far as I've been able to find, is basically as good a climate as you can find for growing weed.
Dude, so not being that intimate with the cannabis industry until I got into it, right? I just recently I just recently tried sun-grown for the first time last year, and like, mind blown, right? I forget the brand that I tried to, but it was just a completely different experience. And there's a lot of people that talk trash about sun grown. They talk trash. Everything for them has got to be indoor. I gotta be honest, man. And this hard, as a guy who's a cannabis podcast, I think there's a lot of hate I might get for this, but we get up to these 34, 35, 36% strains, 38 pure indoors. Like, I don't need that shit. I really don't. It's don't get me wrong. It's cool. It's fun. I don't hate it. I'm not mad at it. But like at some point when I want the THC percentages up that high, I'm just going to dab. Like there's a vehicle for everything. So I've even gotten to the point and you smoke what you smoke, but like I'm looking the high 20s, low 30s. And that's really the zone that I like to stay in, even mid 20s at this point too. Like I'll smoke more of it. So it's interesting to me to see these pure like indoors. They're just pushing their genetics further and further, when I think I had like a 26, 27% sun grown. It was so flavorful. The bud looked so good. It grinded it up so well. And it was really interesting that just my own personal education based on everybody else's bias.
It's funny to say that. So I think my ideal weed, it'd be like 4 or 5% terps and probably like 13% THC. And the reason I say that is if something tastes good, I want to consume more of it, right? Like, do you pick any of your favorite alcohols based on which one? Like, do you drink Everclear?
No, God,
I'm guessing, right? So, like,
exactly.
if your favorite beer was as strong as Everclear, would that be better or worse? I'm going to say worse, right? Because you don't want to have a beer this big. You want to have a beer this big and another one and another one. So for me, I'd take the terps and lower THC. I'll smoke 2 joints instead of 1. Like that's not a bad thing because I'm enjoying what I'm doing. So I think the THC potency thing is mostly a relic of prohibition, and you can see it in other places. I mean, frankly, you can see it in other drugs as well. When there's a risk to moving product around, there's a trend to have as much value packed into the smallest space as possible. And that means the more potency, the more THC you can fit in a box, basically, the more valuable it is because you're risking moving that box. When that starts to go away, I'm really hoping that the potency hunt for THC is the only thing that matters to consumers will also start to go away.
I agree with you, man. I like it, and I like the variety of it. I find myself falling into that THC trap personally a lot, and I have to kind of slap myself and say, hey, you're smarter than this. Don't just look for the highest percentages. And that's where I've kind of come to this conclusion. It's funny you say that. That's actually been a negative thing for me too, because not only does it taste good, but also like when you roll a good joint, or you happen to buy a really good pre-roll, like, the guys from Loaded put out some really good ones, the Jeter guys as well. You guys, your pre-rolls are really good as well too. Of course, ours, I have to mention Heisman, but when a joint is just smoking really well, I've gotten to the point where I'm like, I'm probably good, but I'm just enjoying the way this smokes so much. I'm just going to keep going. That happens with the
Mhm.
Loaded Co guys a lot
Yep.
too. I'll tell you that.
Yep. Yeah. So, I think, again, you're starting to see some things. You're starting to see, a whole other tangent on that is the type 2 genetics, when you have genetics that are actually bred for more than just THC, and you're looking for things like CBD is the easy one, but also CBG and THCV and even CBN and things like that, right? Like, there's going to come a time when you're, grabbing a pack of cannabis cigarettes that is not just a THC thing. It's flavor, and it's a range of cannabinoids and a specific effect. And I personally think that will become more the norm for more people than the world we're living in today, where, it's like, if the state didn't make you print the CBD, 99 out of 100 brands wouldn't even put the potency of the CBD on the
Yeah.
product. It'd just be one number, two numbers. It'd be potency and price. And milligrams of THC per dollar is not the way that we should be picking our products.
I'm a big fan personally of a lot of the brands now that are putting either flavor profiles on there or dominant terpene
Terpenes, yeah.
profiles. It's something we're going to be adopting as well too.
Yeah, we've just been doing a bunch of R&D with the SC Labs guys, and they have a product called Phytofax, which was developed by another company, but which they use. And so, when you get your COA back, right, which is what clears it in the market, certificate of analysis. So that's your cannabinoid potencies, your pesticides, your heavy metals, all that. But it also, the Phytofax has all the terpenes and the expected effects from them. So they've got this cool little kind of graph on there with each batch, where you can see, the cannabinoids, the THC, it gets 10% of the page or whatever, which is about how much of the page it deserves. And then the rest of it is about the terpenes and the dominant profiles and what effects those terpenes kind of generally gives you. And, it'll be another step towards hopefully moving away from potency. I don't think we can't expect consumers to leave that until we give them something to go to. And it'll also hopefully help us get away from the indica sativa hybrid, super broad categories, and instead start talking about the terpenes within those categories that actually give the effects people are looking for.
Yeah, no, I think this is definitely the future in the industry. I think those of us in it are trying to push for it sooner, but it is a mass education thing that we need to do. I think a lot of the smarter companies are taking that on as part of their marketing. And I think your stores do a phenomenal job, which is why we love working with you guys,
Awesome.
of having that
Hey,
education. I want to kind of change topics. I talk to you about this stuff all day long. And, this is behind the scenes stuff that we talk about being in business, but I feel that you get a lot of unjust hate. And I think that because you're successful and you're also all over the place. But we go back to that legacy versus corporate, right? I think you fit the definition of legacy, right? I was listening to a podcast, and I don't know how widespread this information is, but you shared it on the podcast. So I'm assuming it's on the internet. You're willing to talk about it. And you've had grows for a very long time. You started with a small 3x3 grow in Boulder. I'm assuming that's where you went to school. I probably should have did some better research and actually looked that up on
You're
LinkedIn,
right. You got
but
it.
just grow after grow wherever you were. And I mean, like I said, I'm someone who, I don't think I'm legacy. I've purchased weed for a very long time. I've been in the sketch situations and everything else, but I've never had I've never been someone who wanted to grow my own just because I'm lazy. Like, I don't bake my own bread. I just recently started making doughs from scratch, but like, I'm willing to buy it from somebody. But for someone to get in and actually set up a grow, something that's there and something that is easily found if you're not careful, like, that to me is really that's the legacy side of the business. So, you come from that side of the business. So I don't know where all this unjust hate comes from, because how are you going to hate someone who grew up in the same channels as you and did the things that you did?
Yeah. Oh, I appreciate that. I mean, I won't actually accept the legacy title. To me, I think it's just my personal definition, but it's the folks that have been doing this for decades, years, generations. The folks who had it as a as a lifestyle, right? And what I started with was something that I really enjoyed, but it was, in addition to my other life. It was not, it was something I was doing while doing other things. But that said, you're right. My first grow was before legalization. It was small. It was in college. I really enjoyed it. I'm a science kind of geek and biology and things like that, and I love weeds. So for me, setting up that 6-foot ebb and flood grow with the 6 plants and the mylar and the CO2 and the light, like I love that all the way around, because I love the mechanical part of putting it together. I love the biology of making the plant happy, and I loved what came out of it, which was better weed than I can buy anywhere in Colorado to smoke for myself. Also sold it to my friends, had me not eating in the cafeteria and stuff like that. So it even got the business piece. And then, from there, I've, grown in rooms, I've grown in garages, I've grown in houses, I've grown in multiple houses. And, it's like, was I doing it as my everything? No, right? Like I don't deserve that. I'm not trying to take that from anybody, but was I doing it? Absolutely. I had all the 420 exemptions. I know the pit of your stomach paranoia of thinking that I'd thrown fan leaves in the wrong dumpster and was on video and pulled out a $500,000 crop because I thought someone was going to be showing up and knocking at my door, and I've got 2 kids and stuff like that. I also know the excitement of going into the biggest spot that I've ever had before, whether that was from the room to the garage, or the garage to the house, or the first farm, glasshouse farm 7 years ago. Was 150,000 square foot greenhouse. I thought it was the biggest thing we'd ever seen in the world. Couldn't even believe it. There was no ordinance. It was Prop 215. It was still like, we had SOPs on what to do if the sheriff showed up, helped, trying to build the ordinance, trying to move it forward. But it is true. I think people didn't know we were here, and then they saw us, and they, thought we just showed up big. And the reality is we got big by starting small. And I've loved cannabis for a long time, and I've been doing this in various forms for a long time. And now we're big. And I understand, like some people see that and they need somewhere to put it. But the truth is, the people who work here love the plant. They got here by loving the plant. And we're trying to make the world a better place by bringing cannabis to as many people as possible.
See, I love hearing that about you, because now I put together this whole story in my head about how you got into Glasshouse. Like, so for me, I would work for a technology company, and I was always a cannabis consumer. I mean, I wasn't always, actually. I didn't really start till I was like 2021, when life started to become a little bit more stressful. And I realized that cannabis was much better than drinking, and it really helped me out with my mental health and everything else that I was doing, and lack of sleep and all that stuff. And don't get me wrong, it also made stand-up comedy and movies a lot more funny sometimes. So, I'm not that person. It's like, I only use it.
It makes you a better version of yourself. That's what's amazing about it.
But having said that, I remember, like, towards the end of my IT career, I was really burnt out, and I had left, and I had gone on to do other things. In my head, it was right when a lot of the business influencers came out, and they're like, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. And in my head, I used to be like, I really love smoking weed. And part of me was like, shit, am I like a bad person? Am I a drug addict and everything else? And then the legal market started coming around, and I'm like, no, there's an industry here. And when Florida announced that they were giving out licenses, my dad was really connected into the world of nurseries. So I'm like, I'm going to find a nursery. I'll partner with them, and we'll start this thing. When they gave out, at the time, I want to say like 12 fucking licenses. And if, you weren't related to the governor at the time, you weren't getting one. So, I kind of crushed that dream until I realized, like, hey, this industry needs IT guys. It needs technology. It needs software and all that. And that's how I kind of had my foray into the cannabis space. I feel like, and this is my assumption, and you can correct me here, that you had your day jobs. I know that you had a lot of really great jobs, and Sonos being one of them, which is an amazing company. I have their speakers over here on my desk. But awesome. I feel like there's a part of you that, when you were doing the grows and everything else, you're like, shit, this is what I enjoy. Like, this is fun to me. Like, I'm not that you would do it for free, because we all need to live and you have a family, but it's like, this is what I want to do. And I feel like it was that second life that you had, that you're like, how do I make this life number one? And that's what led to you doing Glasshouse, and really the passion that you have behind everything.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely, for sure. Like I took it from a hobby to a job and a life and all that, because I liked it, and all the reasons, right? I think it makes the world better. I thought that I, brought something unique to it, with the passion for it as well as the tech background, and bringing those two things together. I did it because I think it's, an awesome opportunity to build a business and provide home for our employees and make products that people like and be on the edge of what most business folks are willing to do. Like that's if there's a thread in my life on the business side, it's that I have a lot of experience doing things that not many people have experience doing. So whether that was software.com in the beginning days of the internet, or iStoryTime in the beginning days of the iPhone, or Sonos at the beginning days of digital music, or or the kind of let's call it licensed cannabis in the beginning days of that. When we started, it was far before Prop 64 had been implemented, right? Like this was the first 4 years or so of Glasshouse, 3 years, 4 years of Glasshouse Farms was all Prop 215, and that was a very kind of gray time when you didn't really know what the rules were, and the rules varied, based on where you're at. But that's the space that I was comfortable operating in and figuring out, and that's hopefully how Glasshouse gets started and provides a legacy that's got a really positive background.
So on that note, it's awesome, and I love that because I beyond just the cannabis industry, because I think the entrepreneurs in this industry and even the executives and employees in this industry they have more grit than most other industries, just because of the regulation and everything else that we have to go through. So for you to be able to take something that was a hobby and a passion of yours and make it into a company, especially a company that employs so many people and provides jobs across the state of California, let's not discount that as well too, right? The pandemic moved a lot of people out of California, companies moving out of California, jobs leaving California. You guys are coming in, and it's not like, let me shit on the tech industry for a second. There's a certain level of education you need to work for a tech company. You need to know certain skills. Like you can be taught the cannabis skills. They're very simple. I don't want to say they're very simple. I don't want to discount that, but they're teachable. It's very back to basic stuff. And I feel like it's very enjoyable. But on that note, you have a family, you're a regular person, you're a professional. Do you feel now, especially with how accepting cannabis is, just a lot more comfortable being able to be your whole self and talking about cannabis use and talking about the things that you've done in the past and not having to hide a little piece of yourself? Because I remember like when I first started in this industry and people asked me what I would do, and a lot of times I would either say like consumer packaged goods, or I would say I'm in distribution. Like I never was really 100%. Because I was a little, I had that stigma about myself. I still do that, but that's only because I don't have fucking hours to talk to somebody about the podcast industry or the cannabis industry and what fucking stocks they should buy and everything else. Because now going from looking down on me, they just want to talk my ear off.
Yeah. I mean, actually, no, I guess is the answer, because I've for decades now, I guess, have made kind of the conscious choice that cannabis wasn't something I was going to hide, because when you hide something, that tells other people that it's something that needs to be hidden. And I think that part of the stigma that we have and that we're still fighting, frankly, with cannabis is that a lot of the people that society tends to regard as successful hide the fact that they use cannabis, whether 100%. That's the doctor, the lawyer, CEO, the cop, the judge, whoever. They'll happily walk around with their cocktail. They'll have a bar in their house, which is basically an altar to alcohol, but then they take the weed and they stick it in the back of the sock drawer, right? And so I kind of decided, just for me personally, that was my little thing, which was, I think smoking weed is great, and in doing it in a healthy way, and I think alcohol is fine, and as long as you have a healthy relationship with it. And I think the rest of drugs are fine as long as you have a healthy relationship with it. And I'm not going to hide it any more than I hide the fact that if you open my fridge, you're going to find a Pliny and a Corona and a can or a Wonder, right? Like none of those things need to be hidden, because my relationship with all of them is fine, and I use them a way that I think is healthy. So I've been doing that for a long time and got pretty used to it. I guess the only exception is crossing the border, and those guys ask you what you do. I generally don't say I'm a cannabis guy, right? So it's like I'm a farmer, or I'm in agriculture, or CPG, like you said. So I still know that feeling, but in day-to-day life, I'm pretty out there with the cannabis usage, and hopefully that's my own little piece that makes society and the stigma go away a little bit.
100%. I'm the same way crossing the border too, because I used to do events, and the guys from Canada used to tell me when they said they were a cannabis company at the border, they get banned from the US. So I'm just like, You know what? I'm out. I'm
The federal
proud.
government still has their head up its ass, and those are the guys you're talking to there. So, a reason to make a problem.
100%. No, I mean, to me, it's awesome to be able to be so accepting. And obviously, I made the joke about people talking my ear off, but so many people are curious, and everybody I know, like everybody I know, has some kind of experience with cannabis, or the regular users, and they just don't want to talk about it because they're afraid of what people will think. I have friends who have licenses, like whether they're financial advisor licenses or legal licenses, they're worried about losing, and that's crazy to me because I'm at a point right now where I'm the VP of business development for a cannabis company. So like I expect people to expect me to talk about it and to smoke and everything else. So it's interesting, especially living here in Florida versus California. I think the stigma still lives on the East Coast a little bit more, but I think people are going to more of the extremes. Like the people who didn't like it are still going to be there. And then everybody else is kind of like, it's fine. Just like you said, as long as you
The
have a good
awesome
relationship
thing
with it.
is the biggest determinator that I've found for where your view is on, pro or anti-cannabis is how old you are. And the demographics are in our favor. Almost resoundingly, you find me a 25-year-old who thinks weed's a bad thing. I don't think
Yeah.
they exist, right? How you find me 75-year-olds, it's probably a majority of them, right? The thing is, though, that frankly, 75-year-olds are going away and 23-year-olds are growing up.
Well,
And so I think, we're gonna that's the biggest thing that's really gonna move us forward is you've just got a generation who wasn't raised under dare, who didn't get told that, good people don't use cannabis. And they look around and they see, like you said, no such thing as a mean stoner, right? People don't
no,
get in fights. They don't have sexually assault people. They don't tend to drive, 200 miles an hour on the freeway and get in car accidents. Like, you laugh, you joke, you're a better version of yourself. You eat some food, like you sleep well, you don't have a hangover. Like, this alcohol consumption goes down in states that legalize cannabis for a reason. It's because it's an amazing and better, healthier alternative.
no, I agree with you, man. I think, that's something, a personal choice that I made a few years ago. And yeah, it's funny you say that the age range and everything else. I think a lot of it is also just ignorance. I think a lot of the people who are against it just have never had an experience with cannabis at all, or they're close to somebody who is, or they're close to somebody. I've always said the lazy stoner is a lazy fucking person. The stoner has nothing to do with
Yeah.
it.
If you read the studies, people who smoke weed actually exercise more. They have lower body mass. Like the studies are actually, if anything, it's the other direction than what the stereotypes are. I mean, I don't know. I try and be generous with people in terms of their views, and realize, if you were 75, you grew up in a time where the entire
Yeah.
world was telling you it was a bad thing. And like, that we're being told things by society right now that, many of us are accepting that, well, I'm sure when we're 75, the 25-year-olds are going to realize was bullshit, right? Like,
That fucking TikTok will kill you.
right. I mean, like, think about it, like, I don't know your views, but like most of the kids these days, they're starting to realize like how bad sugar is for you and
Yeah.
how bad, packaged foods are for you, right? And there's a bunch of areas where we're making progress that, the food pyramid that the FDA used to give kids in school was like pizza. That's what you need to make sure you got your pizza and your
Dude,
carbs. And like now we look at it and we're like, holy shit, no, you don't. But
yeah, breads and cereals on the bottom. That's what you eat the most of. I remember because that was like 93 in elementary school. I remember like having to study the food pyramid.
right. And it's basically bullshit, funded by the food packaged food industry and all the other reasons. But the truth always happens. And we get better as a society and as a creature. And that's, that's the way it's, what if we actually did hit the peak and tomorrow we knew was going to be worse than today? Like that wouldn't be a fun way to live. So let's just accept that we're the best we've been so far, and hopefully we'll be a little better tomorrow.
All right. Well, Graham, the last thing I want to talk to you about, just because again, we had mentioned the parent and the professional thing so much. I'm a dad, a newer dad. I have a 2.5-year-old. I have a 1-year-old. She just turned 1. And I'm in a much, like you said, I'm growing up in a different world where, especially by the time my kids realize what's going on, like it's much more accepted. It's much more accepted right now. I don't know how old your kids are, but is that something that you've had to have the conversation with them about? How do you approach that when we talk to kids now? I always like to ask people in the industry that, because obviously for us, there is no hiding it with our kids. It's what we do for a living. It's what we do for work every day. They hear us talk about it on the phone when we're home. They see the clothes we wear and the people we talk to. But, to me, I don't know enough, and I'm not saying it's good or bad. I don't know the ages and with brain development and everything is when it's okay to tell kids to start using cannabis or not using cannabis. I know people have used it since they were 12 and they're perfectly fine. And, you know, again, it goes back
One
to the
of
person
them.
individually. But how do you approach this topic with kids and family, and like, even, you know, it's not just our own kids, but the kids that are going to be in your network, if you will, their friends and everything else like that. How do you guys deal with that?
I mean, I think the easiest answer is honestly, which I think applies to most things with kids. The idea that you're going to keep a kid from knowing something because you didn't talk to him about it. If you don't talk to him about it, it just means his friends are, and or her friends are instead. So I've always treated cannabis the same way I treat alcohol with my kids. I've got a 12-year-old and a 16-year-old, so I'm right there in the thick of it now. But 7, 8 years ago when this started, like it was very different, right? I mean, and as you mentioned, things are more accepting now, but like quick story. My daughter was 9 years old, so what is that, like third grade? Came home from her dare training. The teacher had told her that marijuana is a drug and drug dealers are bad, and her dad's a cannabis guy, and she's crying, right? Like, because
Yeah.
and what do you expect a 9-year-old to do? So you sit down and you tell them about what it is, and you tell them how it's not for 9-year-olds, and it's okay for 21-year-olds, and there's some people who use it for medicine, and some people who use it so much that it doesn't make their life better. And by the way, exact same answer for alcohol, and at least in my opinion, most of the other drugs out there. So now fast forward to today, right? She's in high school, and you're about to be a junior, and cannabis is pretty freaking cool, right? So now her friends are all stealing all the glass house swag and all the other swag my buddies with cannabis companies have, the shirts they send me and stuff, and her whole crew is decked out, wearing weed swag all over town. And she's experimented, but is not. I think there's a piece of it that's like a teenager can't be like their parents, so she almost rebels against it probably more than she would have otherwise, because that's what dad does. But at the end of the day, I know if I had to make the choice, I worry a lot more about alcohol than I do about weed, right? Like, as we mentioned, drunk driving accidents, fights, sexual assault. Like, as a parent, those are the things you're worried about. Not those come with alcohol, right? They don't come with cannabis. And so if I was picking, it's a no choice.
No, and thank you for that, because I think this is an important conversation for people in the industry, people looking to get into the industry, and just fans of cannabis in general, right? Like, because it's been stigmatized for so long, we need to understand how to have these conversations. And I agree with you. When my kids grow older, I want to be the first one that they go to for this, because I am educated on it and I think I can help them the best. There's someone in my life, and for the first time ever, I'll try to be very vague about it because of who this person is. But, they had come to me and they said that they had never really done anything. They didn't really drink or do anything, but they wanted to try cannabis. And they were at an age where I'm sure they can get it from their friends or people that they knew. And I remember saying, I go, listen, come to me. What do you mean? I go, I would love your first time to be with me, because I'm not going to pressure you to do more than you should do. I'm not going to push something on you that you shouldn't try. I'm going to do it with you the right way. I go, you know how much I consume. So let's do this. Let me help you and we'll figure it out. And if you like it, great. And if you don't, whatever. So to me, it was really important that that person had come to not specifically me, but someone who knew what they were doing. Because I think that anybody I think a lot of people who may have a bad view on cannabis that have experience with it had a bad experience, and they just, it goes back to, I don't want to say a bad trip, because you're not really tripping on weed, but like, if someone give you a dab for your first time, like, that's not a great experience. Like, even my dad is not an alcohol guy. He's not a weed guy. And my mom uses gummies. She has 10 milligram gummies that she uses. And my dad tried one and he did not have a fun night. Because he had never consumed before. So now I'm trying to get him to do some 2.5 milliliter gummies, and he's scared shitless. So we'll bring him back to it. But for him, that was a really bad experience. That's going to keep him away from something that can probably help him.
Yeah, and I think that is, it's one of the reasons I'm very confident in the fact that we're going to get where we should go. And it's those stories, right, which happen all over the world, every day, and they're one way transition, right? Like, I'm not hard to imagine that people are like, oh, I thought weed was cool, but now I think it's really horrible, right? On the other hand, there's I thought it was horrible, and then my friend got cancer, my friend couldn't sleep, my friend
Yeah.
had a slip disc, my friend's kid had epilepsy, and it's like those stories they're just one-way stories, and for every person, I'm lucky enough that I get to sit in the center of it doing what we do and having stores and stuff. But I get to see so many of those positive transformations of, the kid soccer coach who said, man, I'm having a hard time sleeping, and I say, oh, you should try these little CBN, CBD, THC gummies. And okay, I guess I'll give it a shot, right? And so I give him the thing, I bring it, and now he's like, where do I get more of those? Those things are amazing, right? And of course, he's telling 3 other
And
people.
you're like, we have a
whatever
store
before.
locator on our site, sir. You can go there.
Right. So check this out, though, because the stigma's still there, and he's a kid soccer coach. He wants me to bring him to him because he's afraid someone's going to see him walking out of the store, right? But we're moving. We're not there yet, right? Like, there should be no more stigma walking out of a dispensary than out of a liquor store. It should be the opposite, right? But here he is in society, not trying to be a bad guy, and actually finding benefit, but still worried what somebody's going to think when the kid soccer coach is walking out of the dispensary. Yeah. So, we're making progress, but we got a ways to go.
So I know I said the kid thing would be the last thing I ask you. This is the one I'll leave you with, because I know we're coming up to the hour here. Future of public consumption. I'm always curious about this one because I personally am a joint smoker. I love joints. I talked about, sometimes the way it smokes.
I love
but I
too.
Also is open and as I am about my cannabis use, I still treat it like a cigarette in a sense, right? Like, it's smoky, it's invasive, it smells. There are people who may not like the smoke, may not like the smell. So like, I'm not going to stand in front of a restaurant that has a patio and smoke a joint. Like, I think that's rude, right? In my own house and wherever I am, and I know there's not a lot of people around me, I'm going to do it. Therefore, like vapes, which I don't love, they become more of a necessary evil for public consumption. I'm curious, as the more public opinion turns towards cannabis, as more markets go rec and the general population starts to adopt, is flower, do you think, still going to be the primary method of consumption? Or are we going to see a huge uptick in beverages and edibles, or even just smaller dose cannabis so people can consume it more like alcohol? I mean, I always say I'm going to keep doing joints through and through because it's what I enjoy. But again, like I said, I do treat it like a cigarette.
Yeah, I do think you'll continue to see flower remain as a dominant category, just because there is so much history there, and is so enjoyable, right? I mean, it's hard to find parallels, there's no solid form of beer, right? Like, or whatever, like there's not hey, how do you want your beer, right? There's only one way. Cannabis is, again, amazing and special in the fact that there are so many ways. I do think, it's hard to replace smoking a joint, and I find it very enjoyable. It's where
I've tried very hard, and I have a case of vaporizers in the closet that show it.
Yeah. But it is interesting, right? Because you point out, smoking in general is not and I'm a very anti-tobacco person with kids and stuff like that. So, when I smoke a joint, always my biggest concern, less so now, but more when they were younger, was I didn't ever want them to think that me smoking a joint meant that smoking a cigarette was okay, right? And like, that was my biggest concern with it, not the weed. It was the fact that normalizing smoking could give them the wrong message. And secondhand smoke and all these other things. Like Santa Barbara, the city, is a no smoking city. You can't smoke anything here, right? Yet, what do you do with a joint? And in particularly, what do you do if a joint is medicine for somebody, right? Like, how do you reconcile all those things? We don't smoke anything. You get a ticket for it. But smoking for some people with cannabis is actually taking their medicine. And how do you put that together, right? Like, can you smoke your medicine in a hotel room? Can you smoke your medicine on this corner? I don't know. It's a sticky and really interesting topic that's got a lot of different nuance to it.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like I said, I in my head, it's a cigarette just because it's invasive. I know it's healthier than a cigarette. I know it's better than a cigarette, tastes better, smells better, looks better, feels still better, smoking. All that stuff. But smoke still comes off of it. And that's just the way that I look at it. So it'd be interesting. I think whoever comes up with a smokeless joint that's an actual joint is going to be a first trillionaire in the world. Yeah. But
they're trying. Vaping weed just isn't quite the same, unfortunately.
It's not, and they're getting close, and there are some really good substitutes, but it's not the same. Nothing's the same as smoking a joint. Just even like me, I had a colleague, we used to joke, we're not addicted to weed, we're addicted to regular breathing. So the in and out. But Graham, this has been an awesome conversation. There's so much more that I can talk to you about, and I mean that truly. So we'll definitely have to do this again. Like you said, we'll have to do this in person. But before I kick you out of here, anything you want to leave us with? Any promotion you want to do?
I appreciate you having us on. It's a happy sunny Friday in Santa Barbara. I hope everyone's having a good one. I think the one thing I'd say is, as much as we can, we should look at ourselves as a combined industry and not as an industry fighting with itself. There's plenty of important things to push back against, big pharma and overtaxation and overregulation and bullshit going on in DC, and the war on drugs itself, which was never really a war on drugs. It was a war on people. And that's the only thing it's ever been successful at, and stopping that. And, if there's one thing, it's like, even if we're different, if you love weed, you're on the same team. We should be looking at a way to make places for everybody who have that viewpoint and pushing back on folks who don't, not bickering with ourselves internally. So I hope everybody think about that a little bit. I know I do. I'm always trying to figure out, how can we support other groups, at the same time being who we are. And I think if we think like that, we can make the world a better place.
I agree with you, man. I love the co-opetition, as they call it in this industry. You and I work together. You guys carry Heisman in all your stores, and I couldn't be happier with that partnership. The team that you put together is amazing. So, folks, go buy your Heisman, all the Glass House stores across California, and definitely check out their infused joints. They're awesome. Your infused joints, the Glass House ones. Those are really
Thank you.
good.
Yeah, I like those too. They're really good. Yeah. And that's a great thing, right? You guys are making a product and we're selling it in our stores, and we have a product that's, doing, like, there's no problem with that. Like, that's the way the world, everyone's got a space, and we just got to work together to make it and find a way to fit in. And, again, we're doing something that I think moves society forward. So we should do the best job together at that, not poke each other.
Awesome. And then just before we let you go, any social media handles, websites to send them to?
Glasshousefarms.org is our main website. The pharmacy is our dispensaries. You can follow me on Twitter if you're bored. But other than that, I don't know, do something good for the world.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Graham. And thank you to everybody at home for watching. We got some great episodes of Elevate Your Grind coming up, starting with Graham right here. These are some of my favorite people in the industry. So folks, tune in next week. We'll see you next time.